Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Disney News Channel. Today, we are doing a ranking for all the Star Wars movies and all the Star Wars series ever released. So, let's get started with The Phantom Menace. This movie is split into two parts for me. The first part, on Naboo, is pretty pointless, and Jar Jar is not really as annoying as others think. He just doesn't add anything to the movie, and just aggravates the characters we love. The second half is on Tatooine, where we get introduced to Anakin for the first time, making the first part feel pointless, and the second half rushed. This also makes the relationship between Anakin and his mom and their goodbye less impactful. As a whole, I feel I would classify this movie as pointless. And the trilogy should have started with Attack of the Clones. Speaking of, Attack of the Clones is surprisingly good and has a story that always had me guessing what was going to happen. The plot with Obi-Wan on Kamino and discovering the clones was so much fun for me, especially after watching the story of the clones in the Clone Wars series. The references in this part to the Clone Wars and other characters in the timeline were amazing. Some of my favorite references were Boba Fett's ship from The Mandalorian, and how they mentioned Darth Tyrannus and Sifo Dyas. Boba Fett and Jango Fett are also really cool characters that I wanted to see more of. Where the movie falls short for me was the part where Anakin and Padme Amidala was the part with Anakin and Padme Amidala. The romance felt less like love for me and more like lust. I also feel like the romance had a lot of missed potential that could have been avoided if the whole movie was dedicated to them. Alright, now let's talk about the Clone Wars. What can I really say about this show? I mean, everybody absolutely loves this show. It's a phenomenal show that with each arc feeling like its own movie that fits right in with the other Star Wars movies, even though it's a show. This show also does a much better job at showing us the fall of the Jedi and the story of the Clone Wars. We also get introduced to some new characters like Captain Rex and Ahsoka that both make Order 66 that much more impactful, since we have gotten to know these characters so well and are not in episode 3. So we are constantly guessing what will happen to them. The animation looks so good and has this rough, gritty look that perfectly shows us how the galaxy is changing, even though we can't see it. Alright, now let's talk about the ending for the prequels. And I'll put here an acceptable. This movie takes too big of a jump from episode 2 that we don't get a good look at where Anakin is as a person, who is supposed to become Darth Vader. The clones' betrayal means nothing to me, because we don't even have one scene where we learn who they are or if they tried to fight Order 66. As a whole, this movie is just tying up loose ends as quickly as possible to lead into A New Hope, and maybe would have benefited if they just had one more movie in the prequel to help tie up some of these loose ends. Speaking of A New Hope, this is a great movie, but the weakest one in the original trilogy. Unlike the other movies, where we learn Luke and Leia are sisters, this one just doesn't feel as big or as grand as the other movies. However, the story is well done, and it's just a nice, simple story that is over before you know it. For me, the Star Wars movies don't really come together until our trio come together. Let's talk about one of my favorite movies. Might get a little backlash for this, but don't really care. Rogue One, for me, is, for better or worse, is the most different Star Wars movie that, just like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, comes out all the better for it. The story and final climax is one of the best, with how dark and serious they make the stakes. The characters are a little bit underdeveloped, but make up for it with the small scenes they have together. This movie is not the best Star Wars movie, but it is one of my favorites. Alright. Let's continue on with the sequel, with the original trilogy here. The Empire Strikes Back is when the Star Wars movies really became something special. This movie furthers the world of Star Wars that was set up in A New Hope in such a meaningful and surprising way. This movie introduces us to so many memorable characters to the world that are so special and iconic that most of us couldn't imagine what Star Wars would be like without them. My only problem with one of the new characters, Boba Fett, is that we didn't really know him as a character until Attack of the Clones, that didn't come out until 2002. The rest of the movie is wonderful, and I would love to do a full review of the movie at a later time. Return of the Jedi is not as grand as The Empire Strikes Back, but it's not as small and overshadowed as A New Hope. This movie may not have as many big reveals, but makes up for it with these big emotional moments for the characters. One of the best emotional moments was the ending, with Luke looking back at Yoda, Obi-Wan, and his newly redeemed father. In the end, this is still a great ending for the trilogy that wrapped up everything nicely. Alright, let's go back a little bit here and take care of Star Wars Rebels. I would say I could put it in between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. This is a great show that has a great overarching storyline about the Rebel Alliance coming together. Unfortunately, where the series loses me is with the side episodes that have nothing to do with the main storyline, and are not interesting or grand enough to stand on their own. The series does get a little bit better after season 2, when they bring in Thrawn, who is a standout character for me, and the only person that adds any sort of danger from the Empire. The final season, however, is a phenomenal ending to the show, and is also where the show really gets good. The animation of Lothal after the Empire takes over is downright haunting, and matches this season's more mature tone perfectly. In the end, this is a great show, but takes a lot of patience. The Clone Wars movie is not as bad as some people say. I will admit, however, that the animation is pretty rough, even for the Clone Wars, and that Captain Rex and the clones have nothing to do. I also agree Ahsoka might be a bit annoying, but I have seen the Clone Wars, so I know the kind of strong, capable Jedi she will grow into by the end of the series. Anakin and Ahsoka also work pretty well together and are the saving grace of this movie for me. The Bad Batch is about on the same level as Star Wars Rebels, with a great overarching story, and unlike Rebels, has some consistently amazing animation that pulls you in, especially in Season 2. However, the side episodes are a real halt in the pacing of the story and make the series very unfocused. This series is also very vague with the characters, making them feel forgettable. I'm not sure where to put The Force Awakens. No, screw it. We'll put it here ahead of Episode 2. The Force Awakens is a copy of A New Hope with characters that are just not built for the story. First of all, Rey is not that bad as a character, and has a lot of time to shine in the second half on Takodana and escaping Starkiller Base. She also has a real nice scene with Maz Kanata. Poe and Finn, however, have nothing to do in this movie and have almost no screen time to explore who they are and their relationship to Rey. The story, however, does have a rough start, with most of the scenes having no stake or purpose. But when the Empire finds them on Takodana, things really pick up and become something more than A New Hope, right? Let's talk about some of the Dave Filoni projects right now. Okay. The Mandalorian has a pretty good first season, but doesn't really find its way until Season 2, and then fumbles it on the last season. The first one tells some interesting stories, but they feel unconnected and feel more like individual episodes that don't connect, which would be fine if they didn't try to pull everything together at the end. The second season is by far my favorite season, with how it tells a complete story that ends in such a beautiful way that we really didn't need Season 3. Speaking of which, Season 3 is by far the worst one, returning to the individual episodes of the first season are not interesting and do not have the few episodes that tie everything together, while also not coming all together in a meaningful way at the end. The Rise of Skywalker is where everything with the sequel trilogy was finally starting to come together. Unfortunately, it all happened to be slow and vague. Poe and Finn are much more interesting than the previous two movies, especially Poe, since we finally learn more about him than him just being a rebellion fighter. The story also has the three main characters together and not all on their own subplot. However, I do still wanted Poe and Finn to be explored even more, and the two new characters connected to Finn and Poe to have more of a purpose and screen time, especially the new Finn character. Actually, I think I like Return of the Jedi a little bit more. So we're just going to switch those two. Okay, I have no doubt that the Book of Boba Fett is the worst series that Star Wars has made. Boba Fett is hardly in the story, and when he does, we learn nothing about who he is. Most of the show is the Boba Fett long and clumsily placed flashbacks that are just confusing and take away from the real present day story that could have been interesting. The other part of the story is The Mandalorian Season 2.5. And the only good thing I could say about it is that it was fun to see Luke again. The Mandalorian story about missing Grogu is sappy emotional manipulation, especially since it destroys the perfect ending of Season 2, with Mando needing to let Grogu go and train to be a Jedi with Luke. And having Grogu come back erased that perfect ending that they could never get back. Star Wars Resistance has a pretty bumpy and pointless Season 1, aside from the ending, but also has a pretty good Season 2. Unfortunately, because of the long, rocky start, a lot of the interesting things in Season 2, like Taurus's mom, is set aside in favor of cleaning up Season 1's problems. The First Order also has nothing to do in the series finale and does not wrap up all the loose ends and just feels like another episode to me. The series is just kind of forgettable, but I feel like they were starting to find their way, and I wish it was renewed for one more season. Just so maybe we could have at least gotten one really good season of this show. Andor reminds me a lot of the Clone Wars series, with each arc acting like its own little movie, with each one better than the other. Unfortunately, I still have a few complaints about this show. To start, I want to say that I don't feel like the characters are as strong or developed as the Clone Wars. However, I can kind of forgive that because the focus was clearly on world building and what the galaxy was like during the early days of the rebellion. Last Jedi is a movie with a lot of potential, especially if they focused more on the Lightspeed subplot and had the three main characters together. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about this movie, and that also goes for Solo, since all I have to say about that movie is that it's just this incredibly boring and forgettable story that is one of the most forced and confusing things that doesn't even make sense. Ahsoka has some great things going for it, and also some things that aren't as good. The new galaxy is extremely cool, but doesn't really become something special until the last episode teases. Thrawn is another great example of something done great, but unfortunately he doesn't have much to do, and does not come into play until the second half. But I can forgive some of the mistakes, because of all the fun references to Star Wars Rebels. Obi-Wan Kenobi is the worst Star Wars show and Obi-Wan Kenobi does not have any sort of meaningful arc or journey. And the planets are basically just a lousy ripoff of other planets. In the end, I really wish they would have just decided not to make this project. Anywho, so that is my full look at all the Star Wars movies and all the Star Wars series. What I really did not see coming here was how the Mandalorian era had a pretty good first start, but is now kind of getting worse and now getting a little bit better. I actually thought the Clone Wars movie was going to be a little farther down. Anywho, that's all for now, everybody. Stay tuned for more videos coming soon. Please like and subscribe.